Ethan's body tensed as her words sank in, his mind fighting against the pull of her presence. But as her hands moved lower, her touch igniting waves of pleasure that rippled through him, he found himself unable or unwilling to resist. As his cock got harder, the voices grew louder, a mix of sultry murmurs and raspy primal tones, their whispers weaving through the air like a forbidden melody, urging him on. The fire behind them exploded in a brilliant flash, and the voices screamed in unison, seductively. Ethan's vision blurred, his senses overwhelmed as the line between reality and something far darker began to dissolve. She guided his left hand to her tit and the other between her legs and asked, "Well, will you listen to our command, Ethan?" She purred. Yes, he breathed, surrendering. Suddenly, Ethan was bare, his clothes gone as if by magic. She wrapped her legs around his waist, guiding him into her. The moment he slid inside, a surge of heat and electricity tore through his body, unlike anything he'd ever felt. She wasn't just warm, she was tight, gripping him, pulling him deeper, consuming him with every breath. The voices grew louder, their chant rising to a fever pitch that reverberated through the room. Ethan's body arched, every nerve alive with desire, his mind drowning in the overwhelming force of her power. Hands and lips seemed to caress him from every direction, the sensation blurring the lines between pleasure and fear. His legs began to quiver, betraying the sheer intensity of the moment, and she grinned wickedly, fully aware of the control she wielded over him. "Relax," she purred, her voice dripping with control. "We've got you." Her hips moved with deliberate precision, slow and teasing, as though she wanted to draw out every ounce of his surrender. The space around them seemed to warp and twist as they rose from the ground, as if the room itself were holding them aloft. Shadows danced along the walls, seeming to pleasure themselves, feeding off the raw energy of their lovemaking. Ethan's grip on her hips tightened, his body responding instinctively, chasing the high she created with every subtle shift. The voices swirled around them, a haunting symphony of moans and whispers that amplified the intensity of the moment. Ethan couldn't tell where she ended and he began, their bodies and souls entwined in something far greater than himself. With a final, earth-shattering cry, she pulled him over the edge, the fire roaring in tandem as the room exploded in a blinding light. When the light faded, Ethan collapsed against the bookshelf, his breath ragged, his body trembling. The air around him was still, the whispers and growls gone as if they had never existed. She stood over him, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, her smile both satisfied and possessive. "Now," she whispered, brushing a hand against his cheek, "you're one of us." The fire flickered, casting long shadows across the room as Ethan's vision darkened. The last thing he heard was her laughter, soft and haunting, before everything faded to black. When it was over, she was gone. The library fell silent, the fire reduced to embers that barely glowed in the dim room. Ethan staggered to his feet, his body trembling, his mind racing with unanswered questions. He called out for her, his voice echoing not just in the empty room, but through the mansion's vast hollow corridors. The air felt heavier now, oppressive in its stillness. The distant laughter and murmurs of the party were gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. His stomach twisted as the realization crept in. Those masked guests, their movements too fluid, their presence too perfect. They hadn't been human. The shadows seemed to retreat, curling back into the corners as though the mansion itself exhaled, sated. And yet, Ethan felt the weight of her touch, her presence, lingering in his very bones, a haunting reminder that he had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Ethan left the mansion that night, but he was never the same. He told himself it had been a trick, a seduction by something beyond explanation. Yet deep down he knew the truth. She was real. She had claimed him. And every Friday the 13th he felt her call. It began as a whisper, a flicker of memory, faint but persistent. Over time it grew stronger, all-consuming, a fire he couldn't extinguish. Each cursed date he scoured the earth for her, chasing shadows and legends, desperate to feel her touch again. But she never stayed. She came and went like a storm, leaving him hollow, haunted, and yearning. For Ethan, every Friday, the 13th wasn't just a date. It was a lifetime condensed into a single night of desire, regret, and longing. Happy Friday the 13th. Until next time, untamed ones.
Falling in